June 17th, 1904 Saipan. The tropical air is thick with diesel smoke and the scent of scorched palm trees. Rain drizzles against the hull of an American M4A2 Sherman tank as it grinds its way inland from the beachhead. Inside, Sergeant Frank Delaney, 2nd Tank Battalion, 2nd Marine Division, wipes the sweat from his brow and shouts over the roaring engine. "Keep her steady, Johnson. If they're going to throw another Chiha at us, I want the gun ready this time." Outside, Japanese machine gun fire rattles through the undergrowth. The Marines advance in short bursts, crouching behind the lumbering tank they once doubted themselves. Only a week earlier, word had circulated through the ranks that the Japanese called these tanks gasoline coffins. They laughed at the M4's high silhouette and its tendency to burst into flames when hit. But that morning, as the Shermans rolled through Garapan's outskirts, it was the Japanese who were laughing no longer. From a ridge ahead, a Type 97 Chiha tank emerges from the smoke, its 57mm gun aimed low, the crew confident. To them, the Sherman is slow, clumsy, and vulnerable. The Japanese commander gives the order to fire. The shell hits. Sparks shower the Sherman's glacis plate, but it ricochets harmlessly. Inside, Delaney grins. "They're bouncing off us! Load he!" The Sherman's 75mm cannon thunders. The Chiha vanishes behind a flash of white smoke and flying steel. When the air clears, all that remains is a burning husk, its thin armour melted open like a tin can. In that moment, the Japanese infantry nearby hesitate, a second's pause that costs them dearly. The Shermans and Marines surge forward, cutting through trenches and bamboo thickets. For the first time, the once mock tank becomes the spearhead of American momentum. Through the wreckage, one captured Japanese soldier would later mutter in disbelief, "We thought they were weak, but they never stopped coming." That realization would echo across the Pacific. 2 years earlier, in 1942, when Japan still held the initiative across the Pacific, the Imperial Army's armoured officers viewed American tanks with open disdain. The Type 97 Chiha, though light and undergunned by European standards, had served them well in China and early campaigns in the Philippines. Against light years saw us US armour like the M3 Stuart, it seemed more than adequate. In Japanese training films, the Sherman was mocked before it ever reached their shores, depicted as clumsy, thin-skinned, and mechanically fragile. "The Americans build tanks as they build cars," one officer sneered. Fast, but for peacetime roads. That arrogance took deep root. Many Japanese units in 1943 were still drilling anti-tank tactics suited for outdated M3s, expecting US armour to remain predictable. They didn't anticipate the sheer industrial wave that was coming. Thousands of M4 Shermans rolling from American factories, each a little better armoured, a little better armed, and backed by air and naval dominance that Japan could no longer match. By the time those same soldiers encountered the Sherman on the Tarawa Atoll and later at Saipan, the laughter had begun to fade. Reports from the front spoke of tanks that would not die. Even after multiple hits from anti-tank guns or magnetic mines, Shermans often rumbled forward, scorched but still operational. Private Kenji Matsuda, serving with the 9th Tank Regiment, recalled his disbelief in a letter home. "We struck one again and again, but it kept coming. Its tracks were on fire. The crew inside did not stop." The Sherman wasn't perfect. It was high profile, sometimes mechanically temperamental, and could indeed ignite under the right conditions. But on the jungle battlefields of the Pacific, those weaknesses were eclipsed by what mattered most: coordination. Unlike the isolated Japanese tanks that fought piecemeal, the US Marines had learned to synchronize armour and infantry into a single moving wall. When a Sherman advanced, riflemen moved beside it, clearing enemy sappers and protecting its flanks. When infantry stalled under fire, the tank's gun levelled the bunkers ahead. By mid-1944, the gasoline coffin had become something else entirely. a steel guardian that turned ridiculed machinery into unstoppable progress. And soon, on the blood-soaked hills of Okinawa, that transformation would reach its terrifying conclusion. April 23rd, 1945. Southern Okinawa. Rain pours in sheets across the ridges of the Shuri Line, turning the earth into a churned swamp of clay and shattered bamboo. The smell of cordite and decay lingers in the humid air. Somewhere ahead, a column of M4 Shermans from the 6th Marine Tank Battalion growls forward under a curtain of artillery fire. Inside one of those tanks, Corporal Joe Ramirez, the gunner, peers through his periscope. Every few seconds, flashes of Japanese anti-tank fire burst from the fog-shrouded ridges. Each flash could mean death, not just from shells, but from suicidal sappers armed with satchel charges. "Eyes open, boys," Ramirez mutters. "They'll come crawling right out of the mud if we stop too long." He's right. Out of the mist, 3 Japanese soldiers sprint forward, hunched low, clutching explosives. Marines on the flanks shout warnings, rifles crack, and grenades thump into the wet earth. The attack evaporates in a spray of smoke and screams. The Sherman pushes onward, treads churning deep furrows through mud that smells of diesel and blood. Over the intercom, the tank commander barks, "Target! Pillbox! 11 o'clock! AP shell! Up!" The gun recoils with a thunderous crack. The concrete bunker ahead collapses in on itself, fire licking out from the blast. Above the battlefield, American Corsairs sweep low, strafing the ridgelines where Japanese defenders have dug in with fanatical precision. Yet even here, even with the air thick with smoke and rain, the Shermans remain the backbone of the advance. For the Japanese, this battle is no longer about victory. It is about honor and survival. The 32nd Army, commanded by General Mitsuru Ushijima, knows their defenses are crumbling. They unleash every remaining tank, a handful of aging Chi-Ha and Hago light tanks, in a desperate counterattack near Yonabaru. What follows is one of the last tank-on-tank clashes of the Pacific War. The Japanese tanks, small and agile, weave between trees, firing wildly, but their shells shatter harmlessly against the Sherman's frontal armor. The return fire is devastating. Within minutes, the hillside burns with the glow of ruptured fuel and exploding ammunition. From his command post, a captured Japanese officer later confessed to his American interrogators, "We thought your tanks were weak, but you build more in 1 week than we could in 1 year. We never had a chance." The laughter that once greeted the Sherman had turned to silence and to awe. As the Marines pressed toward Shuri Castle, the sound of tank engines became the sound of inevitability. Each rumble of treads marked the collapse of an empire built on overconfidence. By June, the last Chi-Ha was a smoking relic on a muddy hillside. The Shermans, scarred, battered, some still burning, had done what no one thought possible. They had crushed the counterattack and broken the last armored resistance of Imperial Japan. But behind that victory lay something deeper, a realization shared by both sides. The war in the Pacific was no longer decided by who had the bravest soldiers or the sharpest blades. It was decided by who could build and who could adapt. June 1945. Okinawa lay in ruins. The smell of salt and ash hung in the humid air as bulldozers cleared paths through wrecked villages and shattered tanks. Amid the devastation, the surviving Shermans stood like relics of another world, scarred by shrapnel, streaked with soot, yet still functional. In the weeks following the battle, US ordnance officers began inspecting the destroyed Japanese armor. The findings were grimly consistent. The Type 97 Chi-Ha's armor, barely 25 millimeters thick, could not withstand even glancing hits from the Sherman's 75mm gun. Its shells, by contrast, failed to penetrate the Sherman's front at any range. The imbalance was catastrophic. Across the Pacific, Imperial officers received the reports in disbelief. They had once prided themselves on ingenuity, on fighting spirit, on a doctrine that believed the will of a soldier could triumph over the machine. But now, standing among the ruins of Okinawa, they confronted an enemy that had made war not an act of courage, but of industry. The Sherman was never the best tank of the war. It wasn't the fastest or the most heavily armoured. Yet in the Pacific, it represented something the Japanese military could not match: a system. Behind every Sherman that rumbled across a coral beach was an assembly line in Detroit, a shipyard in San Francisco, and 1,000 men and women working in shifts around the clock. For every tank Japan lost, it could replace perhaps one. For every Sherman the US lost, it could replace 50. Captured diaries from Japanese tank crews revealed a shift in tone after Okinawa. Their tanks come like waves. We burn one, and another takes its place. There is no end. By August, as the atomic age dawned, Japan's last armoured units were in tatters. Fuel shortages had turned their remaining vehicles into stationary bunkers. Once, Japanese soldiers mocked the American tank as a gasoline coffin. Now, they prayed their own machines had enough fuel left to retreat. When the war finally ended, US officers toured the remnants of the 47th Independent Tank Brigade near Kagoshima. Among the twisted hulks of Chi-Ha tanks, a rusted propaganda leaflet was found, depicting a Sherman engulfed in flames, labelled the weak American machine. The irony was haunting. The weak machine had rolled through the Pacific, from Tarawa to Tinian, from Saipan to Okinawa, a symbol of a nation that had mastered the art of mass production and adaptation. In the end, the lesson of the Sherman wasn't just about armour or firepower. It was about perception, how arrogance blinds, and how underestimation destroys. For the Japanese tank crews who once laughed at it, the Sherman had become something far greater than a machine. It was a harbinger of inevitability, proof that the tide of war could be forged, not in honour or myth, but in factories, sweat, and steel. As Sergeant Delaney wrote home after Saipan, "They said our tanks were coffins. Maybe they were right, but if so, they were coffins that rolled straight through hell and came out the other side."